We have questions. He has answers. He's Tom Pelissero back here in the Rich Eisen Show. Good to see you, Tommy P. How are you?
Yeah, Tommy P.
Good to see you, Rich. What's up to my fellas in studio?
Yeah,
Hey,
what up, baby?
Tommy P.
Okay. I don't know, Tom. I'm a little upset with you.
It's good to see TJ showed up for work today. I did not think that was a given.
No, I know. He was in his own darkness retreat yesterday.
You could have given me a heads up, Tom. That's all I'm saying.
All right, Tom.
There's a lot of people who feel that way.
Tom, why did this happen? I know the Joneses were talking up Kenny Clark, and I know they were talking about stopping the run, but we all know 26-year-old elite first-team All-Pro pass rushers don't get traded for 3-time Pro Bowl 30-year-old defensive tackles straight up for a playing season. I know there's draft compensation, but for the 2025 season, it was essentially a trade of Micah Parsons for Kenny Clark. That just doesn't happen. So why did this happen, Tom?
Let's start with the timeline here, because there seems to be a misconception that, as Jerry Jones said last night, that they got this thing done in 5 minutes. That was not the case, regardless of any rumors or whatever was reported out there. This had been going on for weeks. The Cowboys, once Micah Parsons requested a trade in that lengthy statement back on August 1st, they inevitably started getting calls. And I know of multiple other teams beyond the Packers who made those phone calls. And in the early going, it was difficult to tell whether the Cowboys would seriously consider trading Micah Parsons. The compensation, if they were to do that deal, was pretty clear, which was it would be something in the neighborhood of the Khalil Mack trade back in 2018, which was actually a little bit less than 2 first-round picks, because then there were some swaps and there was a 2 that went back to the Bears in that deal. But basically, it was going to be 2 first-round picks, give or take. That was going to be the price. We now know from Jerry that they eliminated some teams if they did not feel those teams had a defensive tackle that was worth them bringing in as part of the trade. But let's set that aside here. This trade with Green Bay, in terms of the trade compensation, was done 3 days ago. The Packers and Cowboys had agreed. It was going to be 2 first-round picks. It was going to be Kenny Clark. This is the only team. So in order to get to that, Rich, of this is the one team, this was weeks of them surveying the landscape of, hey, what else potentially could we get out there? The last piece of this then became the contract, and that was what was going on over the last 48 to 72 hours. David Mulugeta, who presided over another really unique situation several years ago with Deshaun Watson, also presiding over this one, and knowing that much like in the Watson case, regardless of what was going on in terms of off the field and potential disciplinary considerations, they had a lot of leverage because it was basically free agency. In this case, you had kind of a free agent vibe in terms of what he was able to do, not playing 4 teams off each other like he did with Deshaun Watson, but the reality that it's very rare players who are on one roster truly get to negotiate a contract with a different team, which effectively gave Micah Parsons veto power over that trade. In other words, if the Packers don't pay what the price is, you simply say, I'm all good. I'm not going to go to Green Bay. They're not going to give up 2 first-round picks and their starting nose tackle for a guy going into the last year of a contract. So the Packers went to $47 million per year in terms of the new money on the extension. Even if you consider this a new 5-year, $212 million deal, which it kind of is from a team accounting standpoint, that's still over $42 million per year. That's still the biggest deal ever for a non-quarterback. The fact that Packers were able to make that type of commitment to Micah Parsons goes against so much of how they have operated for decades here. There are countless trades that they have been close to. Randy Moss, Tony Gonzalez. I mean, name all these players over the years where they're in it, and then it came right down to it, and it's, we don't want to do that extra 1 round in the pick. They hadn't traded a first-rounder, much less 2 first-rounders, since 1992 when they acquired Brett Favre. The year after that, they signed Reggie White as the first free agent. Those 2 helped usher in this golden age of Packers football that really has remained undisturbed for several decades. But if you look around the rest of the league at what the teams have done that have won Super Bowls, which for all the Packers' success, they have not yet done in the Matt LaFleur era in Green Bay, there's been something bold about what they've done in the trade market. Howie Roseman does it every year. He's in on every trade, and he makes a lot of trades. You had the Rams, of course, who were trading all their picks to bring in guys that could help them right now. The Chiefs have been very aggressive, not just trading for guys, but trading guys away in like the Tyreek Hill trade. And there's a corollary here, Rich, between that trade and what Dallas did. In a completely different spot, you're talking about a Chiefs team that had gone to the AFC Championship game that year, that had won Super Bowls with Tyreek Hill on the roster, but they felt like not just getting what at the time was a first and a third round pick, but freeing up $30 million per year in cash and cap space would allow them to address all these other needs, rebuild the defense, rebuild the offensive line. They did that. They went back and they won 2 more Super Bowls and went to a third last year. For the Cowboys, you heard Jerry Jones talk a little bit about that last night, that, hey, this is not just the 2 first-round picks and Kenny Clark. This could turn into 5 players. He wasn't talking about trading down in the draft. He's talking about, we got all this extra cash and cap space because we're not paying a pass rusher now $40+ million per year. Yes. And I get the people that sit there and go, well, you use those picks just to try to find the next Micah Parsons. What this was, as much as anything, Rich, for Dallas, was a referendum that they did not ultimately believe that Micah Parsons was going to be the difference or not to them winning a Super Bowl for the first time in 30 years. They tried to do the deal. Jerry thought they did the deal in April, in March. In the end, Micah Parsons said, no, you need to negotiate with that with my agent. They were not willing on the Cowboys standpoint to do that. They never talked with David Mulugeta. They never tried to do a deal. He did confirm, reporting by our James Slater last night, Jerry did, that in the end, they made one last shot. Parsons and Mulugeta came to the Cowboys like, hey, well, we're still willing to sign with you. And the answer a few days ago from the Cowboys was, you're on the 5th-year option, you're under contract, get ready to play next Thursday at Philadelphia. That was basically the end of Micah Parsons as a Cowboy. It just took a few more days for the Packers financially and otherwise to finalize Micah Parsons being a Green Bay Packer.
Okay, Tom, you just said a lot there, and I appreciate it. Excellent information. You gave me what happened. I need why it happened. I need the why, Tom, because I understand they need to stop the run. I understand they need Kenny Clark. I understand even what you said, that without now paying Micah all that money, they could pay other people that money, which, by the way, they might have had room to do a little bit had they signed people like Dak or CD earlier. I mean, but that's for another day. We've had those days quite a bit and waiting for resolution for this. You don't trade away 26-year-old generational pass rushers at the elite all-pro level for somebody 4 years older at a defensive tackle position. You just don't do it. We don't see it because you don't do it. These things you do not do.
The Raiders did it. Not for a defensive tackle.
No.
But the Raiders did make similar timeline, similar type of trade with Khalil Mack. The key was this, Rich, though. They got the capital, right? They got the capital to go, all right, we're going to rebuild. That was John Gruden's whole philosophy, too. It was much like the Cowboys thinking, which is you tie up that much money in someone who's not your quarterback, it hamstrings who else hurt. But what did they get out of that trade? The Raiders drafted Ryan Edwards, a wide receiver who was basically never heard from again. They drafted a safety named Bless Austin. They drafted Damon Arnett, a cornerback, in the first round, who they cut after he put a video on the internet of him waving guns around and threatening to shoot somebody. And they got Josh Jacobs. That was the 4th player they got with the picks in that trade. It was a good player. Then they ultimately weren't able to re-sign him, and now he's teammates with Micah Parsons with the Packers. You get all the picks, all the cap space, all the cash you want.
Right.
If you don't find your next Micah Parsons, we're all going to reflect on this and say it's a massive error, obviously, on the Cowboys' part.
And I get it. And the Cowboys have had an excellent history of drafting well recently as well, except at the defensive tackle position, which is maybe part of why we're here. Is there anything to the fact that they were sick and tired behind the scenes of Micah Parsons? Because this was, in my mind, watching the Jerry Jones press conference on our network, the subtext of almost every answer he gave. I don't have a problem. The locker room's not going to have a problem. As a matter of fact, I feel better. I think that, I'm not saying that Micah wasn't, we greatly appreciated his time here, but we're in a better position. We have a better chance to win, which to a Cowboy fan and pretty much, again, anyone else, you do not trade 26-year-old kids at this position for somebody 4 years older in an interior lineman. You just don't do it. And they did it. and there was a down of trust. There has to be some. Is there anything to this, Tom?
It is fair to say, Rich, if you believe that a 26-year-old elite pass rusher who's had double-digit sacks, Pro Bowl every year he's been in the league, if you believe that guy is one of your absolute core players, cornerstone dudes, locker room leader, you're not trading him. That's absolutely fair. And you go back to last fall. They got it done with CeeDee Lamb because he's one of their guys. They got it done with Dak Prescott because he's one of their guys. They did try. Again, Jerry thought he had a deal done with Micah Parsons, and they could have strung this out and said, you're just going to play on the fifth-year option. We're not listening to the trade calls. You want to lose $1.3 million a week or whatever it would be by missing games, go for it. We're going to take that money. If you don't show up by midseason, we toll your contract. We own you for 2026 as well. And then we got 2 franchise tags beyond that. They could have gone down that road. But I still go back again, Rich. I know I've talked about it here before, to what we reported on Super Bowl Sunday, which is the Cowboys were having these internal discussions about Micah Parsons going back to last fall. And it was not simply, though this was certainly a big part of the conversation, the fact they got $60 million a year in Dak, they got $34.5 million in CeeDee Lamb. Is it really wise to pay what at the time would have been like $35 to $40 million for Micah Parsons? It ended up being a much higher number. But they had serious considerations of, is this in the best interest of the Cowboys to re-sign him, or should we trade him and get a bunch of compensation and kind of be able to address all these other needs that we feel we have? Well, they clearly came to the conclusion that, well, when in doubt, sign the guy. They thought in Jerry's mind they had a deal done. And then Micah said, call my agent to finish the deal. And the Cowboys said, no, we already negotiated this deal. There are other factors in this. There is certainly, and you go back, why did Micah Parsons, slide not that far, but why did he not go top 5 in the draft? Part of it was just some of the things about, is he an independent contractor? Is he going to be one of the leaders on the team? All this other stuff. Is he kind of on his own program? And you see that, guys will be in OTAs where you'd like to have your guys around and he's off sumo wrestling somebody in Japan. I mean, that's just Micah. He's into, podcasting and doing all these other things, but he's a hell of a player. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, and the Cowboys have dealt with a lot worse than a guy who sometimes goes on podcasts and says things that you wish he shouldn't. There's currently a whole Netflix documentary about how you can win with guys who are doing things much, much worse than anything that Micah Parsons is doing. But Jerry Jones is operated by a certain code, and you heard parts of this when he's talking last night. He felt like in his business life, in his football life, when you shake somebody's hand, you feel like you've got a deal. That's it. And he has done this with so many other players. Him and Bill Belichick are the 2 guys through the last couple of decades, 2-3 decades of football, who would do this all the time. Bring the player in, get with them, say, here's the contract, work it out, then basically call the agent and say, hey, we got a deal. You can sign off on this now. This was the rare occasion where a player went, no, actually, I don't feel comfortable with this. He's got an agent who's done tons and tons of deals, and they simply never engaged. Now, Jerry, last night when he was asked about, some of the recent answers that he gave to our guy Irv, among others, about not trading Micah Parsons, and he basically said, well, why would I tell you I want to trade a guy if I'm trying to trade him? I would do the opposite, which is what exactly he did here. And that, again, reinforces what we've reported, which is regardless of the timeline of when certain information came out, Rich, this was a several weeks process. They finally felt like they had the proper compensation to pull the trigger on this deal with the Packers. This was done sometime, I'm messing up my days now, but I believe it was around Tuesday. It was 3 days ago that they had the trade locked in, which then gives the leverage to the agent to go, all right, Packers, you want him? This is what it's going to take. He ends up with a monster contract, and the Cowboys end up with what they hope can be a very small, size-down version of the Herschel Walker trade that Jerry Jones invoked last night, talking about how that was the launching point from a dark moment in Cowboys history, a 1-win season, and then all of a sudden drafted a bunch of future Hall of Famers and winning a few Lombardis.
What can you share about what the market was then? I mean, clearly, because again, the Cowboy fans, it's a bitter pill. The Ice Bowl team, the Favre team, the Rodgers team, the Des Cauditt team, the team that one and done McCarthy team just a couple years ago. Why Green Bay? And again, I understand they needed the cap and they wanted a player. Who else was in this mix? How wide a net was this thing? best you can tell.
There's a lot of Packers Cowboys connections.
I know that, and it's tough.
Jerry said he didn't take into consideration.
Clearly.
He said, other than trading him in the NFC East, we don't really care because you play half these teams on a yearly basis. Anyway, I mean, what I would tell you is there were, a bunch of other teams. Okay, I got a lot of calls, I had a lot of conversations with GMs, coaches, and people in the league, all trying to get to the bottom of why is this situation so weird? Like, what is actually going on with Micah? And a few weeks ago, when I was talking to people, and inevitably I would say, like, the price was pretty clear, but I'd say, do you think that they really want to do it? And everyone's kind of like, we can't tell. They talk about it. They talk about a price, which would indicate what it would take to get the player. But is Jerry ultimately going to say, yes, we are doing this? That only became clear really over the last week or so here. The other thing that I thought was informative, Rich, was when some teams were digging into this with Micah Parsons, they didn't see a guy who necessarily was going to be an ideal fit. And I know that sounds completely crazy. Again, I would go back to the draft when Micah came out, where there were some coaches who would say, well, what does this guy really do? Is he a lineman? Is he a defensive end? What is he? The answers from the teams that liked him was everything. He can do everything on the field. But if you're going to give up $47 million per year on an extension like the Packers did, 42 and change in terms of the life of the deal, and give up 2 first-round picks and give up a player, you better have a really good plan for him Monday through Saturday, as well as on Sundays, to get the most out of Micah Parsons. There were some teams that just kind of backed away a little bit just because this is such a gut check, Rich. We didn't see 10 years ago, you didn't get trades like this. Trades are a relatively new phenomenon in the NFL. We now have seen a handful of trades involving 2 first-round picks for a player. The Rams did it with Jalen Ramsey. The Seahawks did it with Jamal Adams some years ago. There's a few other examples, but it's not a really long list of times the teams have been able. Khalil Mack, obviously, although that ended up being, in terms of the picks that went back a little bit less than 2-1. It doesn't happen very often. Usually you only see those caliber of trades involving quarterbacks because that's the one position where you can really make a sea change. But for the Packers, again, a team that for decades had not operated like this, to go all in, it really seems like a reflection that the time has come and the league has evolved and it's worth taking this type of a risk. The Packers can justify it in their heads as, well, it's not really 2 first-round picks. We'll just count Micah Parsons as our first-round pick next year, and we get him this year. And, okay, 1 additional pick beyond that. But those first-round picks also are your young, cheap workforce that keeps your salary cap and your roster healthy, which has been a hallmark of what the Packers have done. Ron Wolf hired Brian Gutekunst into the organization in 1999 as an area scout. Ron Wolf was the same guy who pulled off the Favre trade and signed Reggie White. This was a Ron Wolf style move from one of his, at the time, very young proteges. And texting and talking with people in the building yesterday, Rich, at Green Bay. I said this on TV earlier, but Matt LaFleur's texted me with a few other words I won't mention it. It was, I cannot sit down.
I bet.
They are floored about this magnitude of a move a week and change out from the season.
A jolt in the building. In the 90 seconds I have left, Tom, give me the split on the number of people around the league who are texting you saying this is wild, this is insane, or actually see the Cowboys' point of view. What's the split?
I would say that more people are surprised that the price wasn't a little bit more for Micah Parsons than anything. It really depends. It's impossible to go apples to apples with a trade involving a player, because if the Cowboys viewed Kenny Clark as a guy that in isolation they would have traded, let's say, a 3rd round or 2nd round pick for, okay, then basically you got 2 1s and a 2 or a 3. But there were other teams that thought, just based on how good the player is now, productive, how young, that even with the cost in terms of salary, that, they would have anticipated that the Cowboys could have gotten a little bit more. There's an understanding about the reset value of this. What people were floored by is just the fact that these 2 teams made this type of deal. Jerry Jones, who year after year has his pedal to the metal and is 82, 83 years old, and you wouldn't think has an appetite for a rebuild, is now talking about, hey, we got all these picks over the next couple of drafts to build the thing. And the Packers, who never the team that finalized this deal, are all of a sudden the ones making an all-in type of move that just historically has not been their jam. It's a fascinating storyline that we'll be following all season, and particularly, Rich, looking forward to that Sunday night game,
no doubt,
Week 4 in Dallas.
Tom, thanks for the info. You be well. We'll chat next week.